Welcome all. Right, so as I said, we'll make a start. I'll reiterate a few things as we're going through, yeah, hopefully, like I say, the information provided will be useful. So first of all, we'll just set out what the agenda is going to be for the meeting. So firstly, we're going to look at what the current housing market is like in Kidlington. It's relevant to know where we currently stand, to know where things could potentially go. So we need to look at where we are currently. We will then look at what impact other stadiums and other new stadiums have had on house prices in the local areas. Again, that'll be interesting information for you to see. Thirdly, then we're going to look at where a house price is envisaged to go without the stadium, how the prices then could be affected after the stadium, and finally then we will have a Q&A at the end. So any questions you've got, there is a Q&A function on Teams, so you can pop all your questions in there. Questions will remain anonymous, and I will have a quick look at them before we publish anything, but it'll give you a good it'll help me sort of just understand where everyone is in terms of their thoughts. So right, first and foremost, a small introduction for any of you that don't know. I do see some names that I recognise in the meeting here, so good to see those names again. Others you may have no idea who Robert is, and even who Alistair Redhouse are, and what authority do I have to even talk about this sort of thing. So I began working in Kidlington, specifically with Alistair Redhouse, with AR, since 2012. So I've been in the village now for 11 years, had a very good grasp of the different markets we've experienced in those 11 years. And it's scary to think how many there actually have been. Most notably, Oxford Parkway. That was one of the biggest developments, if you like, that's happened in the area in the last however many years. And that really is a base, and we saw a huge uplift in the market back then. We've obviously then had the more recent things, the Brexit vote, and what that happened to the market, COVID, how that affected things, the stamp duty holidays, and now obviously we find ourselves in the announcement of the stadium. So I really have had quite a long-standing position in the village. I feel, some may agree, some may disagree, and I've got a very strong grasp of the market. I've had plenty of conversations with the community about their needs, their desires, where they see Kidlington, what improvements can be made to Kidlington, all sorts of manner of things with it. I do want to make a quick note that the meeting itself isn't going to touch upon the general sentiment of the area and what's going to happen to the area, i.e. whether you're in favour of the stadium, whether you're against the stadium, what opinions are about traffic, noise, all those sorts of things. Those I won't be touching on. I'll principally be touching on the house prices, what the stadium could do to house prices moving forward. I know that a lot of you probably in this meeting and around, and lots of people that I speak to since putting the flyers out and the conversations I've had about this, do have concerns about other matters. However, these won't be covered off in this meeting. Feel free to ask. I won't necessarily answer them, but it will just give you an insight of where house prices are. That's my authority. That's what I know. That's where I feel comfortable, and my knowledge base is such that that's what I'm going to be talking about. Okay. So, right, we'll dive into things then. Like I say, any questions you've got, if there is anything, there is a Q&A chat. We'll be doing all the Q&As at the end of everything. So, current market conditions. I don't know whether you've read the news recently, but the housing market nationally is experiencing a little bit of a slowdown. And a drop certainly from where we were in mid 2022, when the market really was at its height. A lot can be contributed to where the market is at the moment. Obviously, some will blame the Liz Truss. Others will just point at the huge inflated prices that we saw over the course of the second half of 2020, 2021, and 2022. Those house prices really did rise quite exponentially in those in a very, very short space of time. I have a slide later on, or a point later on, that will show that we were looking at something close to 24% increase since 2019. So huge inflated values. And naturally, that was going to change. That was going to be affected principally by many, many factors. As we come into August, and August is really the data that we have up to at the moment, on average, house prices, and this is nationally, this isn't locally, house prices have dropped 2.4% in the year from August 2022 to August 2023. That's the most recent data we have from Land Registry, which is, real world prices. That's what people are paying for properties. There's a lot of news articles, and you can get very, very bogged down in the news articles of exactly, Halifax says this, and Lloyd says this, and NatWest says that. Ultimately, we want to look at what is Land Registry. What are people actually paying for properties? What are they completing on? That's the important information that we need to know. So moving a lot more closer to home, we want to look at OX5. We want to look at Kidlington and the surrounding villages. Where is the housing market there? So I've got some interesting stats about this. Since into quarter three, we've obviously just ended quarter three. We saw a 16.3% drop in house sales over that time, which is a quite a significant drop in house sales. There's a good explanation for that, and that's principally that there have been a big drop in mortgage approvals and a huge drop in gross mortgage lending as well. People's purse strings are tight. We all know this. It's not news to any of you that we are in a cost of living crisis, and this is not surprising based on that. With the base rate what it is, with mortgage products, I think we just had our first mortgage product. So 5.99, 5.88. Apologies. The joys of technology. Not too sure what happened there. It dipped out for a second. Yes, it's not surprising that gross mortgage lending is down. There have been many instances that certainly people that I've been speaking to over the course of the last 8, 9, 10 months, where their affordability prior to the interest rates dramatically increasing was a lot more. They could afford to buy the same property. I had one instance, a gentleman wanted to purchase a property at around 550,000, maybe 500,000. He could still get that same mortgage. He could still buy at 550,000, but his ongoing payments, his monthly repayments, were such that it was just untenable. The lenders were willing to lend him, but their own personal finance meant that wasn't possible. And that is a story that I hear frequently and constantly, and it's not a story that I think will change anytime soon, moving forward. Interestingly, though, despite all of this, there have only been a 0.7% drop in average asking prices. And I think that's quite an interesting statistic, that although there have been a drop in house sales, the asking prices haven't fallen massively. I think there's a number of things for that. One is just where we are. We do live in a very positive area. People do want to move to places like Kidlington. We're very, very well connected, and that will always be a draw for not only Kidlington, but I think Oxfordshire in general. So locally, we have seen a slowdown in buyer registration. There have been an increase in long-term listings, so properties that have been on the market for more than 16 weeks. There have been an increase in those. We are starting to see that things are selling. There certainly have been instances where properties that were on the market for a little while have started to get a bit of traction, and starting to get some things coming through. Some of that may be attributed again just to the time of year that we've just experienced. We've had a very strange summer, it seems. The market really is a buyer's market, and that will give buyers more chance to negotiate on properties. We've just come off the back of 3 years of really a seller's market. I often joke that back in 2021, if I put any property on the market, almost there would be viewings, there would be interest, there would be offers. It would probably sell for above asking price as well. That's just the way the market was, and it's just very, very different now. A lot of the statistics that we're looking at, we're seeing that things are more like a market in 2019 than they were in the last 2 years, for sure. But ultimately, everything becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more people that discuss the house prices dropping, the fewer people that will want to buy. They're always going to be wanting to catch the bottom of that market. The more likelihood that the buyers are going to be making low offers, trying to find the vendors that are in need of selling. And luckily, again, I've not come across this scenario yet, and I'm hoping that I never do. I've not come across anybody who is needing to sell their property because they can't afford any repayments or any remortgages. And I sincerely hope that I never have to have any of those conversations with anybody, because that is not a market, that is not a place that I want to see anyone being, really. We have seen, and this is just as a business, this isn't locally across all agents, but we've seen on average a property takes just over 100 days to sell in this market. So a little over 3 months, which again is very, very similar to where it was in 2019. So although there's a lot of doom and gloom, it really isn't as bad as I think the media certainly would portraying things. So the largest impact that we've seen, principally, again, this goes to the first-time buyer market, the investment market, and the aspirational home movers. For first-time buyers, for sure, the interest rates are they're going to find problems with it, because everything has gone up. Investment buyers, it's going to be hitting into their profit. And whatever, again, your opinions are on investors, ultimately their interests lie in profit margins. And the aspirational home movers, so anyone who is looking to just upsize because they're a bit bored of their house, we're not really going to see those. You're not going to take that opportunity now to make that move, especially if you need to sell your own home. You don't want to be selling it necessarily at the bottom end of the market. But certainly, to get a free-flowing market, the first two, the investment buyers, the first-time buyers, they are vital. Ultimately, it's those that start the market. They start the chain. They get things moving. For example, the first-time buyer will buy the 2-bed, the 2-bed buys the 3, the 3 buys the 4, the 4 buys the 5, the 5 buys the bungalow. That's the way the market is. And without that starting point, everything else will suffer because of it. So this is an interesting graph I want to show you, and I'm hoping my laser pointer here will help me out. So this is a graph that really indicates real house prices. What do I mean by that? Real house prices based on inflation. So you'll see here, this is where the house prices are adjusted for inflation. Going all the way back to 1975, you can just see that there, to Q2, again, that's the latest data that I've been able to source, of where things are. And you can see where the general trend is. But interestingly, house prices back in 2007, just before the crash, were dramatically higher than inflation. Sorry, a few people coming in still. Were dramatically higher than inflation. They dipped a little bit, and then here we are now. So house prices at the moment are certainly under there, but really we're looking at prices a little more than where they were in 2012. So actually, there's always this talk of house prices are unaffordable based on inflation and everything else, but actually they can go back to even 2002 and they're the same sort of level as they were then. So house prices have kept up with inflation quite nicely. What we're seeing now with this dip is this, for the first time, is we're coming under this trend. Where this will go is, again, anybody's guess, and there's some more information I've got about that later. But it's interesting where house prices have normally tracked the inflation fairly closely. So, with that said, as I mentioned, the housing market in Kidlington has proven to be pretty resistant and resilient for things. House prices, as I mentioned right at the beginning, house prices are still 24% higher than they were in 2019. So although, again, there's a lot of doom and gloom about where the market is, actually, house prices are a lot more than they were in 2019. When we saw things in 2007, 2008, really when the last financial crash hit, house prices really took a hit. And they went down astronomically over a very, very short space of time. We're not seeing that. We're not experiencing that at the moment, which I think is certainly very positive. So we'll move on to the stadium developments. So I've had a quick look at other stadium developments that have taken place and how those have affected their local housing markets. So this little table here, it's not terribly clear on the webinar. For those who have just joined, I will be posting this online in other places, so you will be able to rewatch this. Hopefully, you'll be able to zoom in on things. But it just gives you an indication of where house prices in certain areas and certain locations have increased the value of the homes. So you can see in some instances the newest Tottenham Hotspur Stadium that gave an increase of 655% over the course of 20 years. The lowest being one down here in Portsmouth, when they had their new stadium. Again, that gave an increase of about 270% over the course of 20 years. So these aren't short-term things. No investment should ever be seen as short-term. Everything is long-term. You don't go into the FTSE 100 based on a short-term gain. It's all about long-term. So we've had to look at a broad spectrum. Now, you'll notice, if you can see a lot of these stadiums, primarily are for Premiership or Championship clubs. The occasional League One side is in there, but principally it's Premiership and Championship. But interestingly, what we see, so over the 20 stadiums that are on that graph, that works out at, on average, 449% per stadium over 20 years. So per year, compounded, that works out at about a 9.2% average increase per area per year. That's the average. That's what we're looking at. That's what really the market does to stadiums. If that data is to be believed, then that's what it does. Now, interestingly, again, what I've seen is that on average, house prices, if we just got a steady market like we had 2016, 17, 18, 19, house prices grow between 5 to 6% on average per year locally. That's what they will tend to happen. Again, 2020, 21, 22, we saw increases much, much higher than that, but that's on average what they will do. So those areas where those stadiums have been, again, some of them are in London as well, have seen a huge increase on those prices. Areas like Portsmouth, for example, I think they probably had a bigger percentage increase than others. But as I said, these are principally much larger stadiums, larger towns, larger cities with bigger clubs. And that's no disrespect to Oxford United at all, but you've got to think about where they are in terms of knowledge about them. Oxford United are a very good club, but you can't really compare with things like Portsmouth, with probably not Portsmouth actually, but places like Tottenham Hotspur and Nottingham Forest, clubs that are in the Premiership, they are going to have a bigger draw. So naturally, their house prices are going to increase. So it leads me on to the market prediction for the next 5 years. Again, this is relevant because this is how we formulate what the stadium could do and the stadium effect, if you like. And again, I will be coming to that. So over the next 5 years in the UK, this is again long term, 5 years, there will be an average price growth of 12% over that time, which is a lot lower than we would normally have seen. However, that does come back off the back of a drop in house prices. So the OBR, the Budget Responsibility, has said that by the end of 2024, house prices will be 10% lower than they were at the beginning of 2022, just when the market began recorrecting. So they're still going to be lower than they are now, which means that from beginning of 2025 up until 2027, 2028, we're going to have an average growth of about 22%. I haven't compounded that, but on averaging, that's going to be 7.1% each year compounded for those 3 years. So there is going to be growth in those 3 years, or should be growth. Again, for a crystal ball where I could give you 100% certainty. This leads me on then to the market predictions with the stadium. I know that's obviously why a lot of you got involved in this. Where could this go? Where are we going to see housing market prices? Principally, again, it's difficult to know for sure. None of us have a crystal ball. None of us really know where things are going to go. We know a few things I think are fairly sure, but ultimately the stadium's construction, time-wise, is going to start coinciding with a predicted rise in house prices, just on average. So when we see those house prices going up, is that going to be because of the stadium? Or is that just because that's what the market was doing at that time? Again, it's going to be very interesting to know. Ultimately, what do we know that is probably going to happen? We are going to see a likelihood of an increase in investment buyers and developers. That happens. They're likely to be cash rich, and that's going to increase the demand and increase the values for the area. That's, I think, a fairly safe assumption to make. Ultimately, that is then going to change the general demographic of the areas in question. So principally, a lot of that is going to be South Kidlington. The Oxford Road, obviously, we've already seen huge developments on the Oxford Road and leading up to the Banbury Road. That may become more prevalent. Again, something that I was speaking with a few people who I've been talking to is, are we going to see an increase in Airbnbs? Houses that remain empty for a time. Everything is going to change that demographic of people that are living in potentially South Kidlington, but Kidlington as a whole. And what will that do to the house prices? I think principally what we're going to see is, I think the increase is going to be very similar to the ones we saw when Oxford Parkway was announced. When Oxford Parkway was announced, we saw huge investment coming into Kidlington from outside of the area. So people from London, it was notified everywhere. Everyone knew that Oxford Parkway was coming, and that increased the demand for the area. I think we could see an interesting point with other things surrounding that. In all honesty, and this is me being honest here, again, this is my belief. Everyone has their own opinions. I don't believe that rises of 9% plus will be the same with Oxford United Stadium. I struggle to see that it's going to have that much of an impact. Like I said before, they aren't a Premiership club. Come 2025, crikey, with some good years behind them, maybe. But ultimately, let's face it, we're not going to have that, and that's going to ultimately, Oxford United aren't as well-known club as we've seen with other things. So the knowledge of Oxford United Stadium, the desire from people from around the country, and again, I'm talking about London investors, that sort of thing. When we consider things like Oxford Parkway, that served a purpose for people coming and commuting. Whereas Oxford United, no one's going to be commuting from Oxford United Stadium to get into London. So it's going to be a very, very different thing. So I struggle to see that it's going to have the same rise of interest, basically. But I still think there is going to be an initial increase when the stadium has moved into a more official capacity. So again, when we see the last biggest development in Kidlington was Oxford Parkway. Once that was announced, it increased things. You get the initial investors who want to come into the area. So once planning permission, obviously they have leased the land now, from what I understand. They have not bought it. They've leased the triangle of land. So they've got to go through all those hoops. So are we going to see the those increases once the planning approves. Again, I'm going to be looking at things very, very closely over the course of the next 3 or 4 years in terms of what the stadium is doing, how are they getting on with their development, but also how that's affecting things. Am I going to see an increase in investment buyers suddenly flooding to the market? I think flooding is a very strong word. I don't necessarily see that we're going to have all of those coming through. But ultimately, is that going to affect people's desire, i.e., first-time buyers, families? Are they going to want to move to those areas? Again, very difficult to know for sure. I wouldn't necessarily thought they would. I think there's going to be more demand from an investment standpoint in those areas. So yes, that's where we are. Like I say, for a crystal ball to know exactly where things are going to go. We can have a little look at things and see where the market has been. So if you have any questions for me, please do pop them in the chat function or in the Q&A function as well. Michael, I can see you've put one here. Thank you. Can you show us how property prices have been affected in the area of South Stadium? It's been more recent crash shows. It's a very good question, Michael. I don't have that information, but you're absolutely right. That is something that I will definitely look into. It'll be really interesting to know how places like Italy actually fared when the Kasam went in, and what the market forces were at the time when it was put in. Was the market doing well and Kasam just was riding the crest of that wave, or was the market doing poorly and Kasam rose the prices, or did it deflate prices around there? Like I say, don't have the answer to those questions, but I do like that, and that is something that I will look into for sure. Michael, again, I cannot see a price rise for investors hedging on demand for MC-related activities. Yes, again, I don't agree, I don't disagree, in all honesty. It'll be interesting to see exactly where things do go. I think that there would still be an interest from some investors. Again, I'm thinking more property developer types, people who are wanting to put some short-term accommodation. I can see those people wanting to have a bit more impact and impetus into things, and actually putting their money in to invest in an area that they may see as growth. Ultimately, we've already seen some properties who go into Airbnb. I've sold a few that have been Airbnb properties, and the people are saying that the yields they get back from them are vastly above where you would have a standard assured short hold tenancy, where you've got somebody in there for a year. The revenues can be really, really quite high. And I know that there's a lot more people that are now doing Airbnb. So again, are they going to be the ones coming in and wanting to realise and see those increases into things from there? I had a question out of this from somebody asking a little bit more about how the housing developments in the area may affect things as well. Obviously, again, you may have seen that behind Sainsbury's, there's planning that's gone in or going in for how many it was now, 280 homes to be put in there. There's a lot of talk about some of the fields behind the moors going up for sale. We've obviously got the huge increase in properties that are going to come in Yarnton and Begbrook as well. I mean, crikey, 2,500 going in there, which is huge. Ultimately, with new build properties, what we inevitably see is when they are first built, it does have a negative impact on the second-hand home market, principally because new and shiny will often win. People will go in, they'll want to buy new and shiny. So what we will see is for the first 2, 3, 4 years of that new development is that we are going to see a slight change in the house prices and the demand for house prices. And ultimately, that's what affects the house prices more than anything else. It's the demand. If the supply outweighs the demand, prices go down. If demand outweighs supply, prices go up, and that's what we've just come off the back of. So it'll be interesting again with those, but I see ultimately what you tend to find is when new builds are put in, there is a slight decrease in pricing. Any other questions that people have? I can see like somebody is typing something in. Oh no, they stopped. Give it a minute or so. Any more questions that any of you may have? I see something in the chat box, but not a huge amount. Okay, well, in essence, all I will say is thank you very, very much for everyone who's signed up. And oh, hello, here we go from Sue. Sorry. Where do you see what do you see happening to rents? Rents? Yes, they have. Rents are, how do I put this? Astronomical at the moment. When you're seeing 3-bed semis in Garden City, for example, going on the market for rent at £1,600–1,700 a month. I know that the lettings department we have here are always inundated with requests for those properties. Again, what we're talking about, the outstripping of supply and demand. It depends ultimately with rents what happens to a lot of those properties that, again, what I perceive, I may be wrong, I may be proven right, but if they are bought out by investors, how they are then portrayed to the public. Ultimately, the investors who are going to be interested in OUFC events are going to want short-term rents, and that's going to take properties away from people who want their own homes. Ultimately, that's what we've always got to think about with rentals. From a tenant standpoint, they want a home. From a landlord standpoint, they want to provide people a home. That's the traditional way of seeing things. With an Airbnb investor, a short-term investor, they're not necessarily going to see that, and they're going to want to see short-term rents. And if we have 10% of the housing market in Kidlington that goes then to short-term rents, that is only going to increase the demand, and the supply is going to dip. So then we're going to see more and more house rent rises in that time. At the moment, there were things that were potentially being spoken about in the government that were going to slow rent rises, putting rent caps on and that sort of thing. All of that seems to go by the wayside and doesn't seem to go anywhere. So again, where that is actually going to go is very difficult to know for sure. Okay, lovely. I think we've used our allotted time. Thank you so much, everyone, for logging in today. I do hope the information is useful to you. If you do have any questions, I'm always around. I'm always in the Kidlington office here. Please feel free to drop me an email with any questions privately. So my email is Robert, ROBERT, at aredhouse.co.uk. Or you can catch me on my number here in the office. Always good to get me on my direct dial, which is 01865 598 275. I realise I probably should have put these up on the screen so people can jot them down. But like I say, give me a call anytime. I'm more than happy to discuss anything surrounding the housing market in Kidlington and the future. So thank you very, very much. Fairly short and sweet, but I think we covered everything off. So thank you very much. Have a lovely evening, everybody. Have a good rest of your week. And yes, I'm sure I'll see plenty of you around the village other times. All right. Take care. Bye now.